we're going to put together a 26-man roster of underrated guys from the 1960s. If you've seen any of the other underrated guys videos, 70s, 80s, 90s, or 2000s, then you know how this goes. First, I'm going to compare these guys to an underrated movie from the decade, and then we're going to build our roster using a makeshift formula. My favorite underrated classic from the 60s, and up there on my all-time list of underrated movies, is John Frankenheimer's black and white sci-fi thriller from 1966, Seconds. This film was booed at the Cannes Film Festival and was a total box office bomb in the US. But its influence started to show in the 1990s, most noticeably with Darren Aronofsky's debut film Pi, which clearly owed a debt, especially in its extensive use of a quote-unquote snorri cam, the technique of attaching a camera rig to an actor. It's easy to see why audiences weren't ready for it in the mid-60s. The concept is pretty ridiculous on its face. It gives us a midlife crisis turned nightmare when disillusioned banker Arthur Hamilton decides to sign up with a clandestine company that fakes his death, then puts him through an extreme makeover, with some pretty amazing plastic surgery that turns him into Rock Hudson. He gets a new identity and can live a second life. It sounds a bit goofy, but it somehow works. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the president of this weird company is basically Colonel Sanders. But even with all this over-the-top stuff going on, and an everything-but-the-kitchen-sink approach to cinematography by the great James Wong Howe, there is a quietly devastating moment near the end of the movie that is surprisingly moving. Seconds has gotten a critical reappraisal in recent years, and now holds a 4.1 out of 5 rating on Letterboxd. And we're going to do the same type of reappraisal with this group of ballplayers. Now, once again, I'm using a crude statistical methodology as a jumping-off point for this roster. And warning, I will be using the stat wins above replacement here, which I know always sets off a fair amount of people. In my opinion, this stat is certainly not perfect, but it's the best way we have to get a snapshot of a player's overall value and to compare players across era and ballpark. So if you don't like it, that's fine, but please keep it civil in the comments.
I don't want any more bullshit anytime during the day from anyone. That includes me.
Here's the formula. We're finding the players with the most WAR during the 1960s who never landed in the top 10 in MVP or Cy Young voting at any point during their career, 60s or otherwise. But since this is guys, I retain Vibe's veto power, and if something just feels wrong, I'll make a switch. Catcher, Tom Haller. Talked very briefly about this guy in the 1960s World Series video, as he had a big homer in the 62 series for the Giants. Not a guy you hear a whole lot about, but he ranks second in catchers in the 1960s in wins above replacement behind Joe Torre. He inches out Bill Freehan, a guy who has much more of a legacy. And you can see why, as Haller's career stalled out in the early 70s while Freehan was a good player halfway through that decade. And Freehan had a handful of monster seasons, while Haller was more of a consistent guy who was always solid but never elite. So this is one that kind of breaks my system right off the bat, because it's hard to say Haller was terribly underrated when his best career season was his 4.8 WAR in 1968, when he hit 285, 345, 388. Not exactly world-shattering, but mind you, that's in the year of the pitcher. He did get some down-ballot votes that season, but I'd have a hard time saying he should have been ranked much higher than 22nd that year. So maybe he was accurately rated in his era, but the fact that he's not that well known, outside of old-time Giants fans I'm sure, leads to a case for his underratedness. First base, Norm Cash. I'm going Vibes early with this pick, as Cash did come in fourth in MVP voting in 1961. But Cash feels to me like a guy that doesn't have as long-lasting a legacy outside of Detroit as you might expect for how good he was. I'm not going to say that Cash should be a Hall of Famer or anything, but I guess in the days where Harold Baines is in, you gotta ask why not Norm Cash. Cash was number 2 for first baseman in WAR for the decade, just barely trailing Willie McCovey and just leading Orlando Cepeda. Speaking of Cepeda, a Hall of Famer, Cash had more wins above replacement than him in fewer games and had a higher career OPS and OPS plus. But Cash didn't get nearly the consideration for the Hall that Cepeda did, falling off the ballot in his first year of eligibility with a measly 1.6% of the vote. I think playing for a Detroit team that only made the playoffs twice in his 15 years there had something to do with this, as well as being overshadowed by Hall of Fame teammate Al Kaline. Perhaps his legacy would have grown had he won the MVP in his career year of 1961 when he put up an outrageous 9.2 WAR, slashing .361, .487, .662, and leading the league in batting average, on base, and OPS. But unfortunately, there were a couple of other guys who had pretty good years that season too. I don't think it's a hot take to say that Cash had a better year than Roger Maris in 1961. Hard to argue with the guy breaking the home run record getting the nod as MVP, but homers aren't everything. Mantle had the best year of this bunch, especially considering his positional value as a center fielder, but Cash could have been the runner-up here. The biggest snub here is Jim Gentile taking third over Storm and Norman. Those 9 RBI must have been really clutch ones in the eyes of the voters. Cash was also a great clubhouse guy, beloved by teammates and fans, but he also had a bit of loose cannon to him. His drinking apparently approached Mantle-esque heights, or depths. Cash's roommate and fellow loose cannon, Denny McLean, said that Cash was a modern medical miracle due to Cash's ability to drink to excess and still show up to play at an all-star level. But he did show up late. He routinely missed the team's 9 a.m. workouts as he generally had a more pressing appointment with the toilet bowl. Another of his roommates, Whitey Herzog, was quoted as saying that being roommates with Norm Cash was just like having your own room. Second base, Ron Hunt. Again, similar to Tom Haller, I don't know that I would agree that Hunt is all that underrated. I'd say he was pretty accurately rated as a guy with no power who could get on base through sheer self-sacrifice. Hunt was quoted as saying, "Some people give their bodies to science, I give mine to baseball." We all know that Hunt is arguably the GOAT in terms of getting hit by pitches, leading the league 7 consecutive seasons and setting the all-time single-season record with 50 in 1971. Not coincidentally his best season by WAR. Yet, a season he didn't garner a single MVP vote. He could have made this list, but it's not particularly egregious. And he did get some MVP votes in other years, including a 15th place finish in 1969. Third base, Ken Boyer. I'm going full-on brain genius vibes at third, as Ken Boyer did actually win the NL MVP in 1964, and did so in a year when Willie Mays was doing this. So that's actually a case for Boyer's overratedness. So what am I doing here? Well, Boyer seems to me like a Hall of Famer, and yet he's never received higher than 25% in his 15 years on the ballot. He's also been denied in 6 years on the Veterans ballot. Boyer is 14th in WAR among third basemen in MLB history at 62.8, tied with home run Baker and leading Dick Allen. The year after his MVP season, Boyer started having back problems and was never the same player again, though he did hang on for another 5 seasons. If he'd had just a couple more prime years before his back gave out, he'd have been a slam dunk for the Hall. Shortstop, Jim Fregosi. I'm really vibing out early on this one. I think fans from my generation and younger, by and large, don't realize how great Fregosi was as a player. We know him as a manager in the 80s and 90s, but Fregosi was one of the best shortstops in baseball back in the 60s, and he did get his share of MVP votes back then, maxing out at 7th in 1967. But Fregosi put up a 7.9 WAR year in 64 and a 7.7 WAR year in 1970 that didn't crack the top 10. In 64, he was the second best position player by WAR, OPSing .833 and playing great defense at short. But he only came in 13th in the MVP vote, likely because Fregosi spent his whole career playing for bad teams, mostly with the Angels, and Fergosi's production also fell off a cliff starting in 1971. Centerfield, Willie Davis. The only guy who also made the underrated 70s guys team, Davis was an even better player in the 1960s, the 5th best center fielder by WAR in the decade, but much of his value came from his elite base running skills and defensive prowess. In 1964, Davis put up 8.3 WAR, but didn't receive a single MVP vote. But you can see why. Most of his value was from that base running and defense, and although he did have a good offensive season, the numbers didn't jump off the page. Although this jumps off the page. Turns out Davis is also a biological dad guy. 1990s outfielder Eric Anthony had never known his biological father and did an online genealogy test in 2017. Through this, he found a cousin, and after he shared that he was a pro ball player, she stunned him by telling him, "You're the second most famous baseball player in the family." Okay, in left and right field, we've got a rhyming duo of underrated outfielders in Bob Allison and Johnny Callison. Allison was a super consistent power bat and decent defensive outfielder who spent his whole career with the Senators/Twins and had a pretty tremendous 4-year stretch from 62 to 65, putting up 22.6 WAR. He really got the Rodney Dangerfield treatment in 63 when he led the league in WAR but came in 15th in MVP voting. And in right, we've got Callison, who is another vibes choice as he did actually come in second for the NL MVP in 1964 for Philadelphia. This was the year of the infamous fold of 64, when the Phillies lost 10 straight to close out the month of September and then finished a game back of the Cardinals for the pennant. Had they not collapsed, you'd have to think that Callison would have had a stronger legacy, as he would almost assuredly have won the MVP over Ken Boyer. Although once again, Willie Mays is like, "I'm still here, guys. God, you know what? Maybe I should just put Willie Mays on this team." Considered by many the best to ever play the game, and yet still somehow underrated. DH, Jim Ray Hart. For DH, we're going to go by batting runs instead of WAR because we don't care about the positional adjustment. We just want the best bat. So Jim Ray Hart is who our formula spits out. And this is a pretty underrated guy, as he's not a super well-known name, but he had some really big years for San Francisco from 64 to 67. His best year was 66 when he accumulated 6.6 WAR and jacked 33 taters. He didn't receive a single MVP vote for some reason, despite ranking 6th in WAR. Like Norm Cash, Hart struggled with alcoholism. But unlike Cash, Hart's baseball abilities greatly suffered for it, and his career fell apart after 68. Allegedly, Willie Mays bribed him into a baseline of sobriety during his best seasons, telling Hart he would give him a bottle of Old Crow every Monday if he showed up and played every day. But as much as Norm Cash was the more functional alcoholic in their playing days, Hart was able to have a less grim second act post-baseball. After hitting rock bottom in the late 80s, Hart entered a rehabilitation center and lived until age 74, working in a warehouse in Sacramento. Cash, meanwhile, died tragically in a drunken boating accident at age 52. Okay, let's turn to the pitching staff because this is getting depressing. For the starters, the 5 guys the formula gave me were Jim Maloney, Chris Short, Claude Osteen, Glasses guy Bob Veal, and Camilo Pascual. But I'm going to drop Veal and Osteen and keep the rest. Veal and Osteen were both good pitchers, but never really good enough to be considered all that underrated. But I'll keep the other 3, with Chris Short taking on a swingman/longman role in the pen, and I'll tack on a few vibe picks for the rotation. Jim Maloney is a guy I'd never heard of before. He was the fireballing ace of some mediocre to terrible pre-Big Red Machine Reds, who had a pretty phenomenal 5-year stretch from 63 to 67. He got some down-ballot MVP votes in those years, but never any Cy Young votes. Although I do have to mention that in the 1960s, voters only voted for first place, and prior to 67, there was only one Cy Young winner for the entire league. So in 65 and 66, Sandy Koufax was the unanimous Cy Young winner, getting 100% of votes. Had they done the vote like they do now, I'm sure Maloney gets a handful. Anyway, Maloney had an absolute monster of a season in 65, actually besting Koufax in pitcher WAR 8.2 to 8.1, although Juan Marichal cleared everyone. And Maloney even had a good year at the plate, ending up with 9 WAR total, the 3rd best in the league among all players, but ranked way down at 21st in MVP voting. And it's not like the Reds were terrible that year, 4th place, 8 games back. Maloney won 20 games and had a pristine 2.54 ERA. So what gives? Perhaps Maloney had what Gen Z would call negative Riz. Who knows? The following year, the same kind of thing happened. He finished in the top 10 in the league in WAR and 4th for pitchers. And he came in tied for 23rd in the MVP with no Cy Young votes. Maloney would burn out quickly when an Achilles injury in 1970 would essentially end his career at age 30. Camilo Pascual had a similar sort of short burst of excellence, doing this over a 6-year stretch. He led the league in pitcher WAR twice during that stretch, but never landed higher than 12th in the MVP vote, and never received a Cy Young vote. In 63, he led AL pitchers with 6.1 WAR and came in third among all players, but finished 12th in the MVP vote. Back in 59, he had his best year, leading all AL pitchers with 7.8 WAR, and in fact leading all players in WAR with 8.6. The dude batted over 300 that year. And yet he came in way down at 19th. This was likely due to Pasquale playing for the lowly Washington Senators. Alright, so now I'm going to cook up a few vibe picks, and this first one I'm going to go full-on brain genius with, and select a guy who not only had a second place Cy Young finish, he's also in the damn Hall of Fame. But if I asked you to do a quiz and name every Hall of Fame pitcher, I'm betting you are naming this guy way down toward the end, if you are even remembering him at all. Like, here we go, let's just do this. Alright, Hall of Fame starters, sure, relievers shouldn't be in there anyway, am I right? You're watching me game now. This is like we're on Twitch, guys. Smash that like button, fam. Okay, I'm gonna speed this up so I don't bore everyone to tears, and I'm not gonna go back before the 50s. Okay, if I'm being honest, I might have gotten Jim Bunning if I was doing this without actively making a video about Jim Bunning, but maybe not, because I thought he pitched primarily for the Phillies, but actually no, he pitched more for the Tigers. Oh, and by the way, if we look at the stats on this quiz, it shows Bunning as not quite the least named pitcher since the 1950s. Bob Lemon and Early Wynn take the cake on that one. Cleveland! This guy is like the Kevin Appier of the 60s, sort of. Or Appier's the Bunning of the 90s, whatever. Guys who are really terrific, but played on bad teams and got absolutely hosed by the Cy Young voters, and by baseball card photographers. Bunning led the league twice in pitcher WAR in 60 and 67. 60 is a less egregious snub, as it was during the one league-wide Cy Young winner, and Ernie Broglio in the NL did outperform him. But Bunning didn't get a single vote. Having an 11-14 record for a terrible Tigers team will do that. 67 was a worse snub, as Bunning had even more of a monster year, also leading the league in strikeouts with 253 and innings pitched with a whopping 302, and received just one vote, losing out to Mike McCormick, who, if I'm going to extend the Kevin Appier parallel, must be the Jack McDowell of the 60s. Prior to like 2009, 22 wins will get you the Cy Young Award every time. And Bunning played for the middling Phillies at that point, so 22 wins was not going to happen for him, even with such a terrific performance. But neither of those were even his best years. Those came in 65 and 66 with the Phillies, when he put up 8 and 9 WAR respectively, and received not a single Cy Young or MVP vote either year. Part of this is because Sandy Koufax existed, and again, part of it is playing for the mediocre Phillies. It's almost surprising that Bunning made it into the Hall eventually, not because he isn't deserving, but because he seems so underappreciated in his time and since. And because in a 17-year career, he never played in a single postseason game. In fact, only 2 seasons did he play on a second-place team. Even Kevin Appier got a handful of playoff innings. Our next vibe pick is Larry Jackson. Generic name guy Larry Jackson is a guy I was just barely aware of, but he had a pretty great career for the Cardinals, Cubs, and Phillies. He did have a second-place Cy Young finish in 1964 with his league-leading 24 wins, but he had an even better year in 59, leading the league in WAR with 7.3, but getting no Cy Young or MVP votes. Several reasons for this. First, the 59 Cardinals were a terrible team, which led to Jackson's 14-13 win-loss record not being indicative of his greatness. It appears the Cardinals' defense was also lacking, as indicated by Jackson's league-leading FIP of 2.87 being so much lower than his 3.30 ERA. If FIP, or fielding independent pitching, is new to you, this is basically a guy's ERA excluding balls in play. So it's his ERA on walks, strikeouts, and home runs. Plays where the defense is irrelevant. A big swing like this often indicates that a guy's fielders were bad and turned a lot of outs into hits. It might not indicate that, potentially just indicating a pitcher gave up a lot of hard contact, but got a lot of strikeouts and didn't walk many. But a cursory look at the 59 Cardinals does seem to back this up. Joe Cunningham was known for being a terrible defender in the outfield. Stan Musial was 38 years old. and Bill White was playing out of position in left field to allow the aging mutual to play first. And in perhaps the greatest battle of underrated 60s guys, on August 18th, 1965, Larry Jackson battled Jim Maloney, both pitching 10-inning complete games. Jackson threw a 9-hitter, giving up just 1 run in the 10th and becoming the hard luck loser because Maloney pitched the only complete game extra inning no-hitter in the live ball era. That's a fun fact.
How about that?
And we'll round out our rotation with another brain genius vibe pick with a guy who won the Cy Young Award in 1964, and deservedly won it. This guy led the league in everything that year. WAR, wins, ERA, complete games, shutouts, innings pitched, and FIP. It's Dean Chance. Since I compared Bunning to Apier on the 90s underrated squad, I'll compare Chance to Pat Henkin, who also had an amazing and deserving Cy Young winning year, but is one of the more forgettable Cy Young winners of his era. Again, this is before my time, so maybe if you were around then, Chance was thought of in the same breath with Gibson and Koufax, but he's not so well remembered, probably due to starting his career in the first year of the expansion Angels. He did have some good years later with some solid Twins teams, but he was toiling in obscurity for quite a while wearing a halo. Bullpen. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we're taking Chris Short in the pen as a swingman. This is another guy I had never heard of, but he had one hell of a 4-year stretch from 64 to 67 for the Phillies. He was more often a starter, but made nearly 200 appearances out of the pen. Then we'll take Al McBean, who it's hard to say was all that underrated. As usual, I find it a bit difficult to make an underrated case for most relievers, but McBean did have some great years out of the pen, including this terrific 3-year stretch for the Pirates. But McBean was most definitely underrated as a personality. Red Schoendienst said that McBean was the funniest man he had ever seen in a baseball uniform. He would regularly do bizarre things like crawl over the baseline when taking the mound, or throw the first pitch of the game underhanded. McBean would have been a great choice to MC a baseball celebrity roast. Boy, did he have some opinions on ball players in the 90s. He called Tony Gwynn a fornicating banjo hitter. I don't even know what that means. And he said, "The big hurt my ass, I would eat him up." Of the Braves rotation, he said, "I never liked that Glavine with the shit he throws, or the other guy either. Where would they be if they hadn't got those calls 12 to 14 inches off the plate?" Hank Aguirre. We'll take another swingman with Hank Aguirre. Wish there was a modern player with the name Aguirre so we could give him the nickname the Wrath of God. That would be so fucking cool. Hank did start 149 games, but spent most of his career in the pen and had, in 1962, what might be the most elite swingman season ever. If we do a stat head search for the player with the most WAR in a single season for a pitcher who pitched at least 40% of their games out of the pen and had at least one start, this is the best season on the list. That's a fun fact.
How about that?
Aguirre led the league in ERA and pitcher WAR that year with 7.4, but didn't receive a single Cy Young vote. He did come in 17th in MVP voting at least, but Aguirre also led all players in the AL that season in WAR with 6.2. Crazy that he lost a whole 1.2 in WAR from his batting. My man could not swing it. Don McMahon. McMahon is another guy I didn't know about. A lifelong baseball man, McMahon spent 18 seasons coming out of the pen, pitched in 3 World Series, 2 for the late 50s Braves, and 1 with the 68 Tigers. He had a pretty great career as a pre-save reliever who put up a couple of 3+ WAR seasons. Then he became a coach in retirement and died with his cleats on after having a heart attack while pitching batting practice in Dodger Stadium in 1987. And then we've got another guy I've never heard of, Ted Abernathy, a submariner who had the highest WAR relief season in the 1960s. Abernathy in 67 put up 6.2 WAR and had a 1.27 ERA in 106 relief innings, allowing only 1 home run all season. Turk Farrell. Farrell was a similar sort of player to Aguirre. He mainly pitched out of the pen, but did make a fair amount of starts and had his best season as a swingman in 1962, putting up 7 WAR with 29 starts and 14 relief appearances. Farrell was 2nd in pitcher WAR and 4th in overall WAR in the NL that year, but didn't get any awards votes. Pitching for the expansion Colt 45s will do that. Wait. What? No. Another biological dad? Yep. That's right, and a very similar story, with Richard Dotson getting an online ancestry test, discovering a cousin, and then finding out his dad was also a major leaguer. What are the chances there'd be such a high overlap between underrated guys and biological dad guys? Perhaps guys like Farrell wouldn't have ended up so underrated if they had spent more time working on busting strikes on the inside corner and less time on busting inside. Sorry about that.
How about that?
Not now, Mel. Don't encourage this type of thing. And I'll round out the bullpen with Dick Hall, who I talked about in the Weak Guys episode. Hall was an extreme control pitcher who had some great relief seasons pitching mostly for Baltimore in the 1960s. Ted Williams tells a story of watching Hall throw warm-up pitches the first time he faced him and practically salivating. Hall looked to him like he was throwing batting practice balls, but when he got in the box, he realized Hall's excellence at pinpointing his pitches, never throwing to the same spot twice, and never getting a pitch to drive. Bench, Bert Campaneris. I'm going to go with Campy here, kind of a vibes pick, as he did come in 10th in MVP voting in one season, and he was pretty highly regarded as one of the best shortstops of his time. And he had plenty of national spotlight too, playing in 3 straight World Series for the A's in the 70s. But Campaneris has a borderline Hall of Fame case. He ranks 21st in JAWS, a statistic that takes a player's WAR total and averages it with their 7-year peak WAR, to give an edge to peak play over longevity. Campaneris is just ahead of Hall of Famer Luis Aparicio. Most of Campaneris' value was from speed and defense, 2 things that are easy to overlook for Hall of Fame voters, and overlook him they did. Campaneris fell off the ballot in his first year, receiving only 3.1% of the vote. Granted, 1989 was an absolutely stacked ballot, but I'll once again look to my old hobby horse, Roy Face. 47 people voted for Roy Face in his 14th year on the ballot, rather than slide one to Campy. No offense to face heads out there, Roy was a great reliever in his day, but come on. Weird that there were so many writers out there going down with the Roy Face ship. You had to know at this point he was never getting in. Yet they took it to the bitter end, getting him 50 votes in 1990 in his 15th and final year on the ballot. My other reason for taking Campaneris on this squad is that I need a backup catcher, and I didn't find any actual catchers who felt all that underrated to me. But Campaneris was famous for playing all 9 positions in a game back in 1965, so he really gives you some versatility. Outfield, Tony Gonzalez. This is another guy I'd never heard of, but he had a pretty solid 12-year career. He did get some down-ballot MVP votes in his best year, 1967, when he finished 9th in position player WAR. He could have come in a bit higher, but he was playing for a mediocre Phillies team that year, so what do you expect? Oh, and look at that, we got Jim Bunning and Chris Short on this team. Wait, Larry Jackson, Turk Farrell? What? Okay, no, this isn't real.
How about that?
Oh,
How
God.
about that?
This isn't happening.
How about that? How about that?
Second, third, and outfield, Don Buford. Buford had a very short but very good career, putting up a solid 36.2 WAR in 10 seasons. He got some down-ballot MVP votes in his career year of 65 when he was second among position players in WAR with 6.9, but placed 25th in the MVP vote. He was a speed, defense, and on-base guy, so that makes sense. After a subpar year in 72, the Orioles tried to offer him a pay cut. Buford was just 1 year removed from a 5.1 WAR season in which he OPS'd .890, although he was 35 at that point. Buford elected instead to double his salary and finish his career in Japan, where he had 4 very solid seasons. Shortstop, third base, Ron Hansen. Here's another vibes pick, as Hansen did come in 5th in MVP voting in 1960, also winning the Rookie of the Year award that season. But that was far from his best year. In 64, he posted 7.7 WAR, 3rd most in the league, but ranked 16th in the MVP ballot. I knew very little of Hansen prior to doing this video, but he seems sort of like the prototype for Cal Ripken Jr. A big shortstop with some home run pop, but still an elite defender. A 1960 Baseball Digest article about him was titled "Big Hunk of Man at Short." He might have been more widely remembered had a back injury in 1966 not slowed his production. First base, third base, Ken McMullen. Another guy I'd never heard of. He was so underrated they couldn't be bothered to put his first name on the chyron. McMullen had a really strong 5-year heyday with the lowly Senators, including a top 10 WAR finish in 1969. None other than Mickey Mantle declared that McMullen was the most underrated player in the league. All right, there's our roster of underrated 60 guys. Please like and subscribe, and of course, let me know who else you think I should have given a second look.
You got